The massive research station Helio 7 floated in the dark emptiness of space like a silver jewel against black velvet. Inside its metal walls, hundreds of scientists from dozens of different worlds worked together on the most dangerous research. Project in the galaxy. But today, the usual sounds of busy laboratories and humming computers were replaced by the heavy silence of fear, deep in the lowest levels of the station. Behind walls made of the strongest metal known to science, something waited. Something that had killed 17 beings in the past 6 months. Something that made even the bravest soldiers shake with terror. Dr. Taman Kim walked slowly down the empty hallway, his footsteps echoing off the metal walls. He wore thick protective armor that covered him from head to toe, but he knew it would not help him if the creature decided to attack. Nothing could help him then. In his hands he carried a datapad that glowed with red warning lights. The latest report was bad, very bad. 3 more security guards had been hurt yesterday when they tried to clean the creature's cell. One of them was still in the medical bay, and the doctors were not sure if he would live. "Sir," called a voice. From behind him, Dr. Unicio Park ran to catch up, her own protective suit making soft whooshing sounds as she moved. Her face was pale and worried behind her helmet's clear face shield. "The station commander wants to see you. He's asking about the termination protocols again?" Taman stopped walking and closed his eyes. He had been afraid of this moment for weeks. How many more people have to die before we admit we cannot control it? They reached the observation deck, a small room with thick glass windows that looked down into the creature's prison. The room was empty, except for monitoring equipment that beeped and flashed with data about the beast below. Most scientists refused to come here anymore. They said just looking at the creature gave them nightmares. But Taman had to look. It was his job to understand this thing, even if it meant risking his life and his sanity. The Vorthok Warbeast paced back and forth in its cell like a caged hurricane. It stood 12 feet tall, on powerful legs that ended in claws sharp enough to cut through spaceship armor. Its body was covered in scales that looked like pieces of the night sky, so dark. They seemed to swallow light. When it moved, those scales rippled like water. It's beautiful and terrifying at the same time, but it was the creature's eyes that made Taman's blood run cold. They glowed like golden fire, filled with an intelligence that seemed to look right through him. This was not just a mindless beast. It was something that could think, that could plan, that could hate. "Look at the cell walls," Unesio whispered, pointing at the metal barriers that surrounded the creature. Deep scratches covered every surface, some so deep that Taman could see the emergency backup walls behind them. "It's getting stronger." Or angrier. Maybe both. The creature suddenly stopped pacing and looked directly up at them. Even through the thick protective glass, Taman felt a wave of fear wash over him. His heart began to beat faster, his hands started to shake, and his mouth went dry. This was the beast's psychic power at work, reaching into his mind and filling it with terror. "We need to go," Unesio said, grabbing his arm. Now, but Taman could not move. He stared into those burning golden eyes and saw something that made him even more afraid than the creature's physical power. He saw intelligence. He saw purpose. Worst of all, he saw patience. The beast was not just randomly destroying its cell. It was testing the walls, learning their weak points, planning its escape. Every day it grew smarter about the prison that held it. Every day it came closer to finding a way out. 17 dead, Taman whispered, reading from his datapad. 7 different species. Humans, Altarians, vegan warriors, even a crystalline entity that should have been immune to physical damage. Nothing can stand against it. The creature below tilted its massive head, as if it could hear their conversation through the soundproof glass. Its lips pulled back to show teeth like white daggers, each one the size of a human hand. It was smiling. "The military wants to study its combat abilities," Unesio said, her voice shaking. "They think they can learn from it, maybe even breed more of them for their own armies." "Madness," Taman replied. "We can barely contain one, if there were more." ... He did not finish the thought. He did not need to. The beast suddenly threw itself against the cell wall with tremendous force. The entire observation deck shook, and alarms began to wail throughout the station. Emergency lights flashed red, and automated voices announced that all personnel should move to safe areas immediately. "The containment field is holding," Unicio reported, checking her instruments. "But it's down to 60% power. It hits the wall like that a few more times." They both knew what would happen. The creature would break free, and nothing on the station would be able to stop it. It would kill everyone aboard, then somehow find a way to escape into the wider galaxy. The thought of this thing loose among the peaceful worlds of the Federation made Taemin feel sick. "We have to make a choice," he said quietly. "We can keep trying to study it and risk losing more lives, or we can destroy it now while we still can." The creature stood in the center of its cell, looking up at them with those terrible golden eyes. It did not seem afraid of their weapons or their technology. It seemed to be waiting for something. "What are you?" Taemin whispered to the glass. "What do you want?" The beast's smile grew wider, showing more of those deadly teeth. Then it turned away and began pacing again, as if it had all the time in the world. The transport ship New Hope looked tired as it slowly moved toward the docking bay of Helio 7. Its white paint was scratched and dirty from the long journey through space, and its engines made soft, rumbling sounds that spoke of hard travel and many miles. Inside the ship, families sat quietly with their belongings packed in small bags, their faces showing the sadness of people who had lost their homes. Dr. Jeho Choi looked out the small window at the research station, growing larger in front of them. His wife So Young held his hand tightly, her eyes red from crying. They had worked on Kepler-4 for 5 years, studying the ancient ruins left behind by a civilization that had died out long ago. Now their work was gone, destroyed by the solar storms that had made their planet impossible to live on. "Look, Minji," So Young said softly to their 8-year-old daughter, who was pressed against the window with her nose making small fog circles on the glass. "That's our new home." Minji stared at the metal station with wide eyes. It was nothing like the green world where she had grown up, with its blue skies and yellow flowers that moved in the warm wind. This place was all silver and black, floating in the darkness of space like a giant puzzle box. "It looks like a spaceship castle," Minji whispered, and her parents smiled for the first time in days. The docking process took 2 hours. There were forms to fill out, medical checks to complete, and security interviews that seemed to go on forever. Minji sat in the waiting area, swinging her legs from a chair that was too big for her, listening to the adults talk about things like temporary housing assignments and work permits. "Can I explore?" she asked her father when he finally finished talking to a tall alien with blue skin and 4 arms. "Stay close to this level," Jeho said, not really paying attention as he looked through more paperwork. "Don't go anywhere dangerous." She nodded and slipped away while her parents were busy with the station officials. She had always been good at moving quietly, a skill that had helped her find many interesting things in the ruins back on Kepler-44 to B. The station corridors were long and straight, with lights that hummed softly in the ceiling. Her footsteps echoed in the empty hallways, making a rhythm that reminded her of the drums her grandmother used to play. The walls were smooth and clean, so different from the rough stone buildings of the ancient city where her parents had worked. She followed the sound of her own steps, turning left and right without thinking about where she was going. The corridors all looked the same, but Minji was not worried. She had a good sense of direction, and she could always find her way back. After walking for 10 minutes, she found something interesting. A small door marked with symbols she could not read, but which had a picture of a child with an X over it. Minji had seen signs like this before. It meant children not allowed. But she had never understood why adults thought children could not handle the same things they could. The door had a lock with numbers on it. It's a kind that needed a code to open. But Minji had watched her father open similar locks many times, and she had learned that most people use simple codes. She tried her birthday, 0817. The lock clicked and the door opened. Behind the door was a small room with buttons and screens, and a big window that looked down into something that made Minji's heart skip. She pressed her face against the glass and stared at the most beautiful creature she had ever seen. It was huge, bigger than the elephant she had seen in picture books, with skin that looked like pieces of the night sky. The creature moved like water, smooth and graceful, even though it was trapped in a metal box. Its eyes were the color of golden honey, and when it looked up at her, Minji felt like it was looking directly into her soul. "Hello," she whispered, putting her small hand against the cold glass. The creature stopped moving immediately. Its great head turned toward her, and Minji saw something in its eyes that made her heart hurt. It was the same look she had seen in the mirror after they had to leave. Kepler 4 for it to be. The look of someone who had lost everything and did not know how to get it back. "You're lonely too," she said softly. The creature tilted its head, as if it was trying to understand her words. Its golden eyes never left her face, and Minji felt a strange connection forming between them. She had felt this before, with the wild animals that lived in the ruins where her parents worked. Most people were afraid of those animals, but Minji had learned that they were just scared and wanted to be understood. "My name is Minji," she said, her breath making a small fog circle on the window. "What's your name?" The creature made a sound that was not quite a roar and not quite a song. It was deep and sad, like the sound the wind made when it blew through the empty buildings of the ancient city. Minji thought it sounded like the creature was trying to tell her something important. "I don't understand your words," she said, "but I think you're trying to talk to me." The creature moved closer to the window, and Minji could see her reflection. In its golden eyes, it was not trying to scare her. It was trying to say hello. "I have to go now," Minji said, "but I'll come back tomorrow. I promise." The creature watched her until she disappeared from the window. And for the first time in months, it did not try to break the walls of its prison. The silence in the observation deck was so complete that security officer Dong Hyanli could hear his own heartbeat echoing in his ears. For 3 months, the Warbeast had never stopped making noise. It roared, it snarled, it threw itself against the walls with sounds like thunder. The creature's anger had been a constant background noise throughout the station, like a storm that never ended. But now, for the first time since it had been brought to Helio 7, the beast was completely quiet. Dong Hyan ran through the corridors as fast as his legs could carry him, his heavy boots making loud clanging sounds on the metal floors. The emergency alarms had gone off 15 minutes ago when the creature's noise had suddenly stopped. Everyone feared the worst. Maybe it had finally broken free. Maybe it was hiding somewhere in the station waiting to attack. When he reached the observation deck, Dong Hyan expected to find broken glass and blood. Instead, he found something that made no sense at all. A small human child stood with her face pressed against the window, her tiny hands flat against the thick glass. Below her, the massive Warbeast sat on the floor of its cell like a giant dog, its golden eyes looking up at her with an expression that Dong Hyan had never seen before. The creature looked peaceful. "Little girl," Dong Hyan said, trying to keep his voice calm, even though his heart was racing. "We need to step away from the window right now." Minji turned to look at him, and Dong Hyan was surprised to see that she was not afraid. Her eyes were bright and curious, the way children looked when they found something interesting. "He's not angry," she said in a voice as clear as a bell. "He's sad. Can't you see it in his eyes?" Dong Hyan looked down at the creature, expecting to see the same burning rage that had terrified everyone for months. Instead, he saw something that made his stomach feel strange. The beast's golden eyes were not filled with hate, were filled with something that looked almost like hope. "That thing is dangerous," Dong Hyan said, but his voice was not as sure as it had been a moment before. "It has killed 17 people. You didn't want to hurt them," Minji said, her attention turning back to the creature. He was trying to talk to them, but they didn't understand. Before Dong Hyan could respond, the sound of running footsteps filled the corridor. Dr. Taemin burst through the door, his face pale with worry, and his breathing fast from running. He had expected to find a disaster, but instead, he found the same impossible scene that had left Dong Hyan speechless. "What is happening here?" Taemin whispered, staring at the child and the quiet beast. "Watch," Minji said, pointing down at the creature. "Look at what he's doing." The Warbeast began to move, but not in the wild, angry way it had moved before. Its movements were slow and careful, like a dance. Lifted its massive head and tilted it to one side, then to the other. It raised one huge claw and moved it in a circle, then brought it down to touch the floor 3 times. "It's trying to talk," Minji said, her voice full of excitement. "Look at how it moves its head, how it uses its claws. It's like sign language. But with its whole body?" Taman watched in amazement as the creature repeated the same movements again and again. The scientist in him began to see the pattern, the way each movement was connected to the next. This was not the random behavior of a wild animal. This was communication. "This is impossible," he said. But even as he spoke the words, he knew they were not true. He was seeing it with his own eyes. "Can I come back tomorrow?" Minji asked, looking up at him with hopeful eyes. "I think he wants to be friends." Every rule in the station manual said that Taman should say no. Children were not allowed in the research areas. The creature was classified as extremely dangerous. But as he looked down at the beast sitting quietly in its cell, waiting for the child's return, he found himself nodding. "Only if I am here too." "Watch," he said. "And only if your parents say it is okay." The next day, Minji returned with her parents, who looked worried but curious. Taman had set up the intercom system so that she could talk to the creature safely from behind the protective glass. "Hello again," Minji said into the microphone. "I told you I would come back." The creature's head snapped up immediately and it moved closer to the window. Golden eyes found Minji's face, and its mouth opened in what almost looked like a smile. "I want to tell you about my old home," Minji said, settling into a chair in front of the microphone. "It was a planet called Kepler-4 for to be, and it had the most beautiful flowers you have ever seen." As she spoke, the creature listened with an attention that amazed everyone watching. It tilted its head when she changed her voice, and its eyes never left her face. When she described the blue sky and the yellow flowers, the beast made soft sounds that were nothing like its previous roars. "It's purring," Dr. Unicio whispered, checking her instruments. "The frequency is similar to what Earth cats make when they are happy." Day after day, Minji returned to talk to the creature. She told it about her favorite books, about the games she used to play, about the ancient ruins where her parents worked. The beast listened to every word, and slowly, its violent behavior began to change. The creature stopped throwing itself against the walls. It stopped roaring in anger. Instead, it waited patiently for Minji's visits, and when she sang the lullabies her mother had taught her, it made soft, gentle sounds that filled the observation deck with something that sounded almost like music. The morning of the 7th day started like any other. Minji walked through the corridors of Helios 7 with her small backpack bouncing against her shoulders, humming a song her grandmother had taught her. She had been visiting the creature every day for a week now, and each visit had been better than the last. The beast no longer roared when she appeared at the window. Instead, it would sit quietly and listen to her stories with eyes that seemed to understand every word. Dr. Taman was already waiting in the observation deck when she arrived, checking his instruments and making notes on his datapad. He had been amazed by the changes in the creature's behavior since Minji started her visits. The violent episodes had almost completely stopped, and the beast seemed calmer than it had been since its capture. "Good morning," Minji said cheerfully, as she settled into her usual chair in front of the intercom system. "Is he awake?" "He's been waiting for you," Taman replied, pointing down at the creature, which was sitting near the window looking up at them. "I think he knows what time you usually come." Minji smiled and turned on the microphone. "Hello, friend. I brought a new story today. It's about a brave knight who saved a dragon instead of fighting it." The creature's head tilted to one side and it moved closer to the window. Its golden eyes were bright with interest, and it made the soft purring sound that had become its way of saying hello. 3 levels below, in the feeding chamber that connected to the creature's cell, something was going wrong. The automated feeding. The system had been designed to deliver the beast's meals without putting any workers in danger. Metal arms would extend from the walls carrying containers of food, while energy restraints would hold the creature in place to prevent it from attacking the equipment. But today, one of the energy restraints was not working properly. The technician who was supposed to check the system had called in sick, and his replacement had not noticed the warning light that was flashing red on the control panel. When the feeding cycle began, the creature allowed itself to be held in place. As usual, it had learned that cooperation meant food, and it was hungry. But as the metal arms extended into its cell, The faulty restraint began to spark and smoke. The creature felt the energy field around its left arm begin to weaken. It pulled gently at first, testing the restraint as it had done hundreds of times before. But this time, something was different. The field flickered and died, and the creature's massive arm was suddenly free. For a moment, the beast simply stared at its free limb, confused by this unexpected change. Then, as the other restraints began to fail, one by one, it understood what was happening. The metal arms that brought its food were still extended, blocking its view of the window where Minji sat. All it could think about was getting to her. Being closer to the one person who had shown it kindness, the creature stood up with a roar that shook the entire station. The sound was different from its previous angry roars. This was a sound of frustration and desperate need. In the observation deck, Mingy jumped in her chair as the beast's roar echoed through the intercom system. Alarms began to wail throughout the station, and red lights flashed on every wall. "Emergency protocols activated," announced the computer voice. "All personnel report to safe zones immediately." "This is not a drill." Dr. Taman grabbed Minji's arm. "You have to go now." But Minji pulled away from him, her eyes fixed on the creature below. "Wait. Look at him. He's not angry." The Warbeast threw itself against the energy barrier that separated its cell from the rest of the station. The barrier flickered and sparked as the creature's massive body hit it again and again. Each impact sent shockwaves through the station's structure. Making the observation deck shake like a leaf in a storm, security teams ran through the corridors, shouting orders and preparing weapons. Emergency bulkheads began to close, sealing off sections of the station. The evacuation alarm grew louder and more urgent. "It's trying to escape." Security Officer Dong Hyan shouted into his radio. "All teams to defensive positions." But Minji could see something that the adults could not. The creature was not trying to break out of the station. It was trying to get to her. Its golden eyes were focused on the observation window, and every time it threw itself against the barrier, it looked up at her with an expression that made her heart hurt. "He's not trying to escape," she said, her voice barely audible over the alarms. "He's trying to reach me." The energy barrier began to fail. Power cells overloaded and exploded in showers of sparks. The creature's impacts were becoming more powerful, more desperate. Cracks appeared in the reinforced walls around the cell. Dr. Taman pulled at Minji's arm again. "We have to leave. The barrier's going to fail." But Minji stepped closer to the window, instead of backing away. She pressed her hands against the glass and looked down at the creature with eyes full of understanding. "He's scared," she said softly. "He doesn't know what's happening to him." The creature reared back for another massive charge. The barrier was flickering like a dying light, and everyone knew it would not survive another impact. The beast's muscles tensed and prepared to throw itself forward with all its strength. Minji stepped closer to the window and spoke one simple word: "Sit." The effect was immediate and impossible. The massive creature stopped in mid-charge, its body freezing in place. Then, with a grace that seemed impossible for something so large, it settled to the ground and sat quietly, its golden eyes fixed on Minji's face. The station fell silent except for the hum of cooling energy systems. Every alarm stopped. Every person stopped moving. In that moment, everyone present witnessed something that would be talked about for generations. A human child commanding a Vorthok. Warbeast with nothing but love and gentle authority. The morning after the creature sat down at Minji's command, the entire station felt different. The constant background noise of roaring and crashing that had filled the corridors for months was gone. Instead, there was a peaceful quiet that made everyone speak in whispers, as if they were afraid to break the magic that had happened. Dr. Taman stood in the observation deck, watching Minji sit beside the creature's containment field. Energy barrier was still in place, but it was no longer needed for protection. The beast lay on its side like a giant cat, its golden eyes following Minji's every movement as she read to it from one of her storybooks. "This doesn't make sense," Dr. Unesio said, looking at the readings on her instruments. "Every scan we've done shows this creature was built for fighting. Its claws, its teeth, its muscle structure. Everything about it says weapon. Maybe we've been looking at it wrong, Taman replied, watching as Minji reached through a small gap in the barrier to touch the creature's massive head. The beast closed its eyes and made the gentle purring sound that had become its way of showing happiness. But the Vorthok Empire used these creatures to conquer entire star systems, Unicio protested. The historical records are clear about that. Historical records written by their enemies, Taman pointed out. What if the truth was different from what we thought? Over the next few days, Minji spent more and more time with the creature. The barrier between them was lowered to allow physical contact, something that would have been impossible a week earlier. The beast was gentle with her, careful not to hurt her with its massive claws or overwhelming strength. I've been thinking about what you said, Minji told the creature one afternoon as she sat cross-legged beside its great head. About how you were trying to talk to the other people, but they didn't understand. I think I know why that happened. Creature lifted its head and looked at her with those intelligent golden eyes. You weren't made to fight people, Minji continued, stroking the dark scales that covered its face. You were made to protect them. That's why you got so upset when the handlers tried to hurt you. You didn't understand why they were being mean.
Doctor.
Taman, who was listening through the intercom system, felt his heart skip a beat. The child's words triggered a memory from his xenarchaeology studies. The Vorthok Empire had been known for many things, but one thing that had always puzzled historians was their deep love for their children. Computer, he said, turning to the station's artificial intelligence system. Show me all historical records about Vorthok child-rearing practices. The data that appeared on his screen made everything suddenly clear the Vorthok had not used their creatures as weapons of war. They had used them as guardians for their most precious possessions, their children. Each family had one creature that was bonded to their offspring from birth, trained to protect and care for them throughout their lives. They weren't warbeasts, Taman whispered, staring at the information. They were nannies, guardians, protectors. Of children, the creature in the cell below had been acting out not from aggression, but from confusion and terrible loneliness. Separated from its purpose, unable to find the child it was meant to protect, it had lashed out in the only way it knew how. When Minji appeared, speaking to it with kindness and treating it like a friend instead of a monster, the creature had finally found what it had been looking for. What should we call him? Minji asked one day, her small hand resting on the creature's massive head as it lay peacefully beside her. He needs a proper name. Dr. Taman smiled as he watched the scene through the observation window. The creature's eyes were closed in contentment, and its breathing was deep and regular. It looked like nothing more than a very large, very strange pet. Guardian, he said his name is Guardian. The creature's eyes opened at the sound of the name. It looked up at Taman with what seemed like gratitude. News of the breakthrough spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. Every news channel, every scientific journal, every diplomatic communication carried the story of the human child who had tamed the untamable beast. But more than that, it carried the truth about what the creatures really were. Humanity, which had already earned a reputation for being unusually good at understanding other species, suddenly found itself in demand across the galaxy. Other research. Stations that had captured similar creatures asked for human consultants. Diplomatic missions that had been stalled for years suddenly requested human negotiators. The discovery led to the creation of the Interspecies Empathy Protocol, a new system for understanding and communicating with alien species. Minji became the youngest consultant in galactic history, helping scientists and diplomats learn to look beyond their fears and preconceptions. Guardian became the first of many such partnerships between humans and the creatures that had once been called warbeasts. As more of the beings were found and properly cared for, they revealed their true nature as loyal, intelligent companions who wanted nothing more than to protect and care for those they loved. Years passed, and Minji grew from a curious child into a brilliant young woman. She became the galaxy's premier xenopsychologist, specializing in understanding the emotional needs of alien species. She traveled to distant worlds, helped establish peaceful contact with dozens of new civilizations, and wrote books that changed the way people thought about alien life. But she never forgot her first alien friend. And she never forgot the lesson Guardian had taught her. Understanding did not begin with fear or suspicion or the need to control. It began with an open heart and the willingness to see beyond the surface. To look past the claws and scales and find the soul that lived underneath, Guardian lived for many more years, happy and content in his role as protector and friend. And when children visited the station, he would sit patiently while they read to him, his golden eyes bright with the joy of finally being understood. The end.